Joshua Hatton is with a group called No Bus Cuts Denton, a solidarity campaign organized by Denton Worker. Denton Worker is a grassroots worker organization based in Denton, Texas. No Bus Cuts Denton, NBCD, was started in spring 2021 to fight back against the attempt by the Denton County Transportation Authority to replace its 8 public bus routes and its drivers organized in ATU Local 1338 with on-demand rides in minivans and other small vehicles operated by Via Corp called GoZone. In the summer of 2022, NBCD formed the Coalition Against Predatory Microtransit, which aims to affect federal policies by uniting transit rider organizations, transit unions, civil rights groups, and environmental organizations. And Joshua has shared his screen, and so take it away, Joshua. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I want to introduce as well my colleague in No Bus Cuts Denton and Denton Worker, Kristine Bray is here as well. And we're going to kind of do this together. Kristine's going to focus on sort of the technical aspects of the transit system here in Denton. And I'll do more of the overview and talk a bit about our, we'll both kind of talk about our activism around these issues. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Kathy. Thank you, Susan. Thanks to the folks at Wisconsin Transit Riders Alliance for inviting us. I think our campaign is really grateful to have a chance to reach out. We've been trying to sound the alarm and organize resistance to the threat of predatory microtransit. So our talk, now I can't seem to, there we go. All right, we'll cover the basics of No Bus Cuts Denton, which Kathy has done pretty quickly and well. Talk about our transit system in Denton County. We do an overview of predatory microtransit. Talk about the ways we fought back, and then kind of ideas we have for achieving victory over predatory microtransit. The parent group of No Bus Cuts Denton is called Denton Worker. We're a grassroots worker organization. Many of us are in union members, kind of rank and file union members. I'm in the Communications Workers of America, Local 6186. We've got folks from Teamsters, from the Postal Workers Union, ATU, the Bus Drivers Union here in town. And then many of our members are not yet unionized. We have 3 main campaigns, 3 main areas of work: No Bus Cuts Denton, Coalition Against Predatory Microtransit. Also, we have a campaign to raise wages for student workers at UNT, University of North Texas here in Denton. We're doing this Raise the Wage UNT campaign in collaboration with the Young Democratic Socialists of America chapter at UNT. And finally, we do Know Your Rights workshops, where we have speakers from Department of Labor, from OSHA, from the National Labor Relations Board, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And we're doing these through local churches. We've done one, we did one about last month, and we've got another one next month as well. Here we'll move on to our discussion of Denton County, Texas transit system. Kind of a general overview. There are really 4 kinds of areas. There's fixed route bus system. Maybe Kristine, I can hand this over to you now. Do you want to take it from here?
Sure. So we're going to cover kind of what our transportation system looks like and has looked like, because that's very important, I think, for understanding how GoZone happened. Because the big argument kind of among the board was, oh, we need to bring in GoZone because our ridership on our buses is so bad. Clearly the buses aren't working. We need to try something else. So the University of North Texas, we're a college town. We have 2 big universities, the University of North Texas and Texas Women's University. University of North Texas has a direct contract with our DCTA bus authority. And so they buy a lot of routes from DCTA, and of course those only operate during the school year, during Christmas break, or the summer semester. The service is greatly reduced, at points not operating at all. And then there is also Connect, which is DCTA's system that they control. And so Connect originally operated as 11 routes across Louisville and Denton. Denton County has 3 cities that have signed on to the DCTA project. There's Highland Village, which is a tiny little town, 4,500 people, give or take. And then Louisville and Denton, which are both about 150, 200,000 person cities. And so there were 11 bus routes operating, and they were not happy with the ridership numbers because the ridership numbers were garbage, which we'll get to in a second. And they decided to bring in Go Zone. So when they did that, they cut, at the time, they were planning on cutting, I think, all but 3 routes. No Bus Cuts Denton initially fought back and got them to keep 5 of the routes. They've since cut 2 of those routes because when they kept them, they rearranged the routes a little bit and made them disastrously bad. One was getting half a passenger per hour because its route was a big looping circle through a primarily residential area that then ended at a highway, right? Which is a horrible route. And it's not like you could get on, go somewhere and then come back. It was a big loop. And so you would have to ride the entire thing if you wanted to, go somewhere on that and then go back home. So terrible design. And then we also have rail, which is our A train. Josh, can you go to the next slide? I didn't get a chance to check the edited slide deck, so I'm not sure what's in here. Okay. Well, the A train goes down to Dallas to connect with the DART system. It was previously running at hour headways, so every hour you could take the train down to Dallas, which is of course the horrible headway. It's down to 30 minutes at the moment. They're looking at possibly bringing it down to 20, and speeding up the actual speed that the train travels at. We have large sections of the track where there is only it's single track, so one train has to wait at the station for the other train to pass through. The biggest issue there is that it goes over a lake, and we only have a single bit of track over that lake, and they're looking at changing that and adding more sidings. But here you can see the total ridership of the system in November 2022, and you can see that those UNT routes there get a lot of ridership. Now, those routes really only connect students from their housing to the university. They don't provide students the opportunity to connect to jobs or groceries or other things that they might need. And so even as they're getting really high ridership, their value proposition in terms of like students being able to live a car-free life is very limited. A lot of people use them to dodge parking fees, right? Which is great. But due to the fact that they are solely planned by UNT, there's not a lot of collaboration between UNT and DCTA and figuring out, well, how can we make these routes, provide more than just apartment to college service? How can we make it so that it complements the Connect network? How can we make it so that the Connect network oh, here we go. This is a route map effective March 14th, 2022. We've since lost some of these routes. Some of these routes have been rearranged, but you can really see that there's no sense of a network here. There's the Connect network, which focuses on that area right there. And that's the A train transfer center. And then there's the UNT network, which focuses on UNT. These networks don't really mingle. They don't really provide transfer opportunities. The idea for the entire system is that you would take a bus from wherever you happen to be to the A train and then go down to DART, or you would take a bus to UNT, and you would never really take a bus to work if you don't work somewhere in Dallas that you have to connect to by train, or you would never take it to groceries. We have very limited groceries in the city, and we only have at the moment really one route that connects to groceries at all. And of course, transfers are difficult because we were having 45-minute headways. We've brought some of the headways down on the Connect buses to 20 minutes, but still the routes are quite miserable and poorly planned. Next slide. Yeah, so here we can see our go zone statistics. The way that I always explain go zone is it's like if we were trying to have Delta switch over from having airports that take big planes to other airports and have them switch to prop planes that swing by people's houses and then drop them off at their destination, right? They carry about 4.5 passengers per hour is the average statistic for how many passengers a GO zone can carry. And that's not mass transit. 4.5 people per hour is not mass transit. And so the other issue is that it was cheaper than the buses when it was introduced. You could get point-to-point service because this was not point to bus and then you ride the bus to your destination. This was point-to-point service. So you could get point-to-point service for 75 cents when a bus ticket was $1.50. So of course, huge demand completely overwhelms the system at basically all times. So you can see that only 63% of ride requests are actually completed. The average time to pick up was 23 minutes. That was this screenshot was from a time when they had just, I think, injected a little bit more capital into running Go Zone. And so that is lower than it has been at other points. And their depart on time percentage is 41%. And that's not for all ride requests. That's only for the 63% of ride requests that get completed. So 2/3 chance you get a ride at all. And when you get a ride, over a 50% chance that you're going to be late. People have lost jobs because of this. People are late to classes or miss doctor's appointments because of this. It's just very unreliable because, again, they're trying to run mass transit off of 4.5 passengers per hour vehicles. Next slide. And here you can really see how badly this is failing. Those are just 4 routes in the DCTA and UNT systems. And trips taken solely along those 4 routes, like starting within a 1/4 mile of a bus stop and ending within a 1/4 mile of a bus stop on one of those 4 routes, accounts for 32% of our August to September of 2022 Go Zone ridership. So many of these trips are along even currently existing bus routes. Next slide. It's just that our bus routes are very bad. We have stops that are in ditches along what are functionally highways, right? We had, before they cut the one running on US 380, we had a stop where it was a cement slab that was about 3 feet by 3 feet on the edge of a 7-lane highway that would, 50 to 60 mile an hour speeds are common. And it was in a field. It was a slab in the middle of a field because the expectation was then that you would walk a little bit down from the stop and cross that 7-lane road to get to an apartment building that was on the other side. So it would pick up at the apartment building and then coming back the other way, you would have to get off at that cement slab and cross 7 lanes of highway. So really like the weakness of our bus system and the inability, none of the board members for the longest time took the time to familiarize themselves with transit issues. We didn't have a full-time route planner. The president of the board would draw routes on napkins, no transit experience, and then hand it off to staff and be like, make it so. So when we talk about predatory microtransit, it is predatory on weak systems where there is not a lot of engagement or knowledge around how to run transit effectively.
Thanks, Kristine. Let's leads us to our topic of predatory microtransit. We've given you a sense of what the system is, and now we're going to talk about the process by which an attempt was made to replace all of the bus routes. Actually, the board documents are very clear, and statements by DCTA executives are very clear. The intention from the beginning has been to replace the entire fixed route bus system with microtransit contract outsourced. And that information you can find on, I'll talk about that in a bit on our website. Predatory microtransit, it's privatization. It takes 2 forms, where the bus system is supplemented with outsourced microtransit. So a transit authority gives a contract to the company VIA or Uber or Lyft to run this. That's one form of predatory microtransit. Another form is when it replaces a whole or part of a bus system with outsourced microtransit. And both of these are predatory in the sense that the salaries, higher salaries, the worker benefits and protections that would otherwise go to transit workers are not there through the first form. It harms both of these forms of predatory microtransit harm workers, riders, and their communities and environment. It also, in addition to kind of reducing the standard of living for workers, it takes away access for people with low incomes and who use wheelchairs to get around. We've found we're in the process of doing some research, testing research on accessibility. And we know from kind of anecdotally from people on our committee as well who try to use GoZone, they are unable to get a ride, or when they are lucky enough to get a ride, the service isn't careful. And so people, again, in order to use microtransit, to use Via's GoZone, you must use a telephone to book a ride. You needn't have the app to do it, but you can call customer service, but you must have a ride. So you must have phone access to book a ride on GoZone. If you do not have phone access, you cannot get a ride. So it takes away access from people with low incomes who often can't afford either a phone or minutes or data. The service we're finding here in Denton with Via's GoZone, it's unsafe, unreliable, and uneconomical. Our website, nobuscutsdenton.org, has safety research we did. We went in the middle of the night and took pictures of GoZone license plates. We found out where they parked the vehicles, and we ran them through the police department, the police departments here in Denton County, to see what kinds of calls for service there were. And we found, I think in Denton, once every 10 days, there was a call for service where police had to respond to something involving a GoZone vehicle. The worst cases were a hit and run where a GoZone driver crashed into another vehicle and then split and ran, and the police had to chase and try to find the vehicle. Another one sent 2 college students to the hospital. It's unreliable, as Kristine has shown. Only 2/3 of the time that a ride is requested does a ride ever result. So it's terribly unreliable and uneconomical at different levels. It's uneconomical at the level of the individual who is paying. Now the GoZone system in Denton, it's capped at $5 per ride. Whereas a bus fare, that's for one way, $5 cap, because there's mileage charges. Whereas a bus ride is $1.50 for the highest cost for a single ride. It's uneconomical too at the level of the city, where of course calls for service increase police costs and the increased insurance costs, and when you get hit by a GoZone vehicle, it can be an expensive situation. And finally, uneconomical for the DCTA and for the public. The DCTA, as Kristine mentioned, put $1.5 million additional into it's about a $34 million contract. They put an additional $1.5 million into the paying to Via, and it didn't result really in any improvement at all for wait times or the number of rides requests that were never happened because vehicles weren't available. It siphons off public funds to the pockets of owners and investors of corporations. So it takes money out of Denton County and puts it into the pockets of the owners and investors for Via that are HUD New York City. And finally, the added carbon emissions. We haven't done much research on this yet, but it just seems to make sense to us that you have a few vehicles carrying a lot of people, and you compare that with a bunch of little vehicles zipping around carrying fewer people. That's not good for carbon emissions and not good for fighting climate change. So again, predatory microtransit is privatization, and it harms workers, riders, their communities, and environment. We in our group are not against microtransit per se, but we want a complementary microtransit that protects workers and is on a much smaller scale than what's happening here at this point. Here's one of our graphics, a member of our committee put together. Again, predatory microtransit eats up good union jobs, eats up bus routes, eats up rider access, and the waste. You have precarious gig work, discrimination, against people with disabilities in particular, and unsafe driving. Kristine mentioned in the case of Denton County, really the process here, which you may be finding in your community, is to sabotage and then privatize. So the bus system never got much attention in Denton, but there's a new
I would
chair.
like to briefly point out that that red sign you see in the background there is a sign for a church. Route 3 services, I think, 4 or 5 churches, and like the rest of the system, does not run on Sundays.
It doesn't run on Sundays, and you see here it's in a ditch. This is a ditch bus stop. There have been a couple ways where the DCTA has sabotaged the bus routes and the bus system in order to bring numbers down. First of all, as Kristine pointed out, terrible design, terrible bus stops. In addition, they've started a program a couple years ago called TRIPS. It's a transportation reinvestment program or something like this, where supposedly surplus money from the DCTA, cities can then apply for that to do things like pay for sidewalks around schools that really, and now the GO Zone, what they're claiming is, oh, GO Zone reaches the whole city, so we can do these additional, I think the last year, I think the city got $3 million for that, or $2 million to do these really unrelated, many of them, programs and projects, rather than making proper bus stops, they put sidewalks around an elementary school. Contracted was awarded to GO Zone in January 2021. You can see that our timeline here, we should probably kind of move through this quite quickly. DCTA has also been, there's been a lot of corruption at DCTA. After the $34 million contract with GO Zone, with VIA, was signed, the DCTA executive who negotiated the contract and promoted it at city council meetings, board meetings, and such, she resigned 2 weeks after the contract was signed. Guess where she went to work right after that? That's right, the contractor VIA. Her name is Nicole Recker. You can find information about this on our website as well. At this point, yeah, we've been able to protect 3 routes, and out of the plan, and again in January 2021, was to cut all of them. There have been problems with board meeting members being replaced, and as we fought back, we've done it at multiple levels. We've blocked the renewal of a consultant's contract. It was about a $120,000 contract. She was pushing the GO Zone VIA contract. We got a resolution from Denton City Council for a 6-month extension of the bus system. We removed the chair of the Transportation Agency Board. That was maybe our greatest victory. The architect, really, his name's Chris Watts, a former mayor of Denton, who had really was kind of the main force behind this privatization and predatory microtransit program. We published safety research and had a resolution that the city did not take up. We held a rally at the courthouse, and we've prevented the installation of a new city representative to the board who was really a crony of the architect of the predatory microtransit program. At the state level, we have an anti-corruption bill, which we unfortunately were not able to get filed during this legislative session. And finally, at the federal level, we're working with our coalition against predatory microtransit. Something we hope to talk with you all about too now and moving forward is how do we achieve victory? At the kind of local level, we want to prevent further cuts, and we want to bring GO Zone in-house. Again, we want complementary microtransit. If it makes sense, great, but let's have it done in-house with good salaries, benefits, and protections for unionized drivers. The state of Texas, we're still trying to work on our, if not this legislative session, hopefully the next one in 2 years, where we have anti-corruption, where executives from the DCTA can't negotiate these sweetheart deals for microtransit contractors, and then go and work right for a much higher salary for the contractor right after the contract is signed. At the federal level, what we want to do is cut off the tap, turn off the tap on funding from the FTA for these for these predatory microtransit projects. We want investigations into the government funding, the federal funding that's already been distributed, and we are very much hoping that you'll be able to help us with our coalition against predatory microtransit moving forward. We've got a couple of kind of graphics we're already using, and here's one we're awful proud of and we like. VIA is the company that is, really probably the main predatory corporation for microtransit. And well, as we've said, we know that it's unsafe, it's unreliable, it's uneconomical. And so we've got a little campaign idea here for saying predatory microtransit is unviable. Kristine, do you have anything else to add, or should we go to the questions?
Kristine, you're muted.
Oh, I don't have anything to add.
Oh. Well, that was great, Joshua. Thank you. I think you should look into making this into a mini series, because I heard your longer presentation a few months ago, and it really sounds like a successor to Dallas or something. I don't see any questions in the chat, but I'm sure that there are people who would like to ask or share. And I also wanted to mention that we have talked with Joshua about doing a sort of an informal get together, probably early in April, so that people can come and learn more and maybe share stories about what's happening in their own communities or what might be happening. Anybody want to unmute and go ahead?
If I could, Kathy, if I could add to that, excuse me, Mark, kind of part of a pitch for that too. What we know best about is what's happening here in our transportation agency. We know what's happening here in Denton, but we've been we're a very small group and all volunteers, and we just haven't had the time to do research to figure out really well where else is this happening. And that's one of the things we're really hoping that people really, it's a global problem. This is a multinational corporation with contracts all over the world. But we want to start, if we can start in Minnesota and your neighbor, that Minnesota and Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, we start with a WRTA and start figuring out where this is happening. Start to put together good research on predatory microtransit. I think that can help us in our broader fight. So that's a plea from our group to y'all, is to see how we could work together. We could share information with you about how we fought back, and we'd like to get information from you on what's happening in your community. So thank you, Kathy, for reminding me to make my pitch there. And Go ahead, Mark.
Thanks. I've actually been down to Dallas and Fort Worth, and I've ridden on DART, Dallas Area Rapid Transit. One thing that I've often wondered, with the whole metropolitan area of Dallas and Fort Worth and the outlying areas such as Denton, has there ever been efforts to form a metropolitan transit, basically like a regional transit authority, that would make it more cost effective for everybody? And I think about fixed routes are so important. I don't know if that approach has ever been done, or do the outer lying areas such as Denton pretty much do their own bus transit?
Kristine, you want to answer that one?
I'm not sure if there's ever been efforts, but Fort Worth has its own system. Dallas, the DART has its own system. And then of course DCTA exists in Denton County. And I think, like a lot of places, and especially just because it's Texas, there's kind of the attitude that if you don't have a car, you don't matter. Like, everybody should have a car. And so there are lots of areas. Denton County has a lot of cities in it. DCTA has 3 member cities, right? Corinth, a city immediately to the south of Denton, is looking at maybe joining, but that's kind of where the level of interest is at. There's not a lot of interest. There's cities in far north Dallas where there's one city that wants DART rail running to it, but the city to the south of it doesn't want DART rail running through it because it's going to bring crime and it's going to bring undesirable people, quote unquote. And so that city north of the other city is now not getting DART access. There's a lot of non-interest in transit or active resistance to transit. And Arlington, which is a city in between Dallas and Fort Worth, is the largest city in the US without fixed route transit, for example.
Wow. Jonathan, you have a question. Do you want to ask it?
Yeah. So I've heard some weird tales from other cities that have VIA programs in place, that Via has a strange habit of going out of business every now and then, where they just sort of disappear for a few days or a week. Like their app just shuts down in a market, or they stop answering phone calls for dispatch, and nobody knows why. And then all of a sudden they're back. I'm kind of curious if you've encountered that experience in Denton, and if there's been any sort of explanation for that, if it's happened in your market, or if you've heard sort of any tales of that from other folks you've been in communication with around the country and kind of fighting this company, because it always seemed like a very puzzling thing from a supposedly serious company that this is happening. Like one of the markets that I've heard this about happening in was Seattle with their King County Metro contract. Apparently this has happened a few times in the last year.
Do you recall any? I remember a couple of times when there was bad weather and the buses ran, but VIA said they wouldn't run Go Zone. Do you know any other examples, Kristine?
No, none that I'm aware of.
Yeah, it doesn't. The reliability issue here doesn't seem to have been where the whole system isn't working. It's just simply that they can't handle the demand. Does anyone? Can I ask this question? If there are other questions, does anyone who's on the call now, is VIA there in your town, in your community, or is there a plan to bring outsourced microtransit to your community?
This is Mark again here. I live in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is just 85 miles east of Minneapolis, St. Paul. And I know one thing that our Eau Claire transit system is looking at is for the outer lying areas of the Eau Claire, Chippewa Falls metropolitan area. They are considering some form of what I wouldn't call it microtransit. I would call it on demand. But I think the thought here, and we've had discussions with our transit commission here in Eau Claire, is if we would do on-demand service, the thought was to not subcontract it out, to basically keep it in-house. And I think that that's effective. I think one of the problems we have here in the Eau Claire area, as areas continue to grow south of the interstate, they're not really what I call walker friendly or bike friendly, or you basically got to have a car. And we have a transfer center downtown where all bus routes come into one central location, which is great. But one of the growing pains we have is that, we're adding more time on as we're trying to serve more areas. And I think at some point we may have to go to a circulator system. I don't know I know Madison, has different, like on the west side, south side, north side, different transfer points. But, I think in some areas, microtransit maybe makes sense, but I've always been a promoter of keeping stuff in-house or keeping it, I think part of the problem when you go to outside companies, you run into a lot of these problems. And I think a lot of times, it might be more cost effective to do on demand, but again, I think fixed route is always the best, but in cases where it's not, keep it in-house and try to work something out. But that's kind of where we're at here in Eau Claire.
Something else Mark just mentioned, Kristine mentioned, and Joyce in the chat mentioned, it seems like the assumption among the decision makers is that if people could drive, they would drive. And that means that sometimes, the decision makers are making some minimal thing for the people who can't drive, rather than some wonderful thing to encourage people who can drive to not drive. And I wonder how a microtransit system either affects that, I guess, if you have anything about that.
Kristine, do you have anything? I think so. The idea maybe is, I'm not sure if I understand what you mean. Is it maybe because microtransit? I think one of the claims is that this is going to get people out of their cars, they're going to leave their car at home and take the microtransit, which is a rideshare program. So that's better than people taking their individual cars. But I haven't seen any data to say that that's exactly what's happening. And Kristine, do you have anything to add to that, or a response to Kathy?
I'm sorry, I sort of lost track of the question there.
Sorry. So the decision makers in many cases seem to be making decisions based on the assumption that the only people who need public transportation are the people who can't drive. Like, let's make something minimal to get people around, but not wonderful to serve everyone. So I just had a question about whether how you think microtransit works into this. Like, it sounds like in your situation, they're trying to cut back on what maybe worked for people to even more minimal service, whereas possibly microtransit could enhance, as Mark was talking about, enhance an existing service. I guess it just depends on who's making the decisions and what their decisions are based on.
But
Sorry
I
if
think,
that's
yeah,
convoluted.
I think I understand a bit better. Yeah, I think the argument that's being made here in this replacement, as Kristine mentioned, is our ridership is low. Oh, they say, oh, ridership is low. Ridership is low. We need to do something else. And as a comrade said it, we went to a conference in DC organized by Transit Center. This was back in January. Someone said there, well, look, low ridership is not no ridership. And I think what is happening is the objective is, okay, we want numbers. We want high numbers of ridership. And GoZone has certainly done that in Denton County. The numbers, are through the roof. But our concern, and we think the concern for everybody should be, what are the effects of this on the people who need public transportation the most, right? For us, it's not worth it to have higher numbers if the people who need the service the most are excluded.
Also, our ridership numbers on GoZone are not good. They just look good because our bus numbers were so bad. If you compare us to any comparable sort of similar sized college city, our transit trips per capita per year are miserable.
Wow.
And I think too, I'm sorry, Kathy.
No, go ahead.
I think another aspect to this is, when we don't spend too much time trying to get in the heads of the people who are beating us up, trying to take away public transportation, but sometimes it's good to try to think it through. And one of the things we're seeing here is, you're trying to figure out okay, yes, higher numbers, good, right? I mean, we see why they would want to do that. I'm not saying that's good, but we understand that that's appears to be their focus. But
Your sound just cut off.
That should.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry. One of the things we found is the same folks who are pushing the bus cuts and the privatization of public transportation are also folks who are pushing for what they call economic development. Now, the DCTA in Denton County is funded by a 0.5-cent sales tax in 3 cities. By Texas law, I don't understand it perfectly, but you can only have, I think, 1 or 2 of these 0.5-cent sales taxes by law for each community, each municipality. So we know from people who work in the economic development department in Louisville, and from city council members and discussions on Denton City Council, the same people who are pushing this privatization and predatory microtransit are the ones who are also claiming, we want this money to go, we want this 0.5-cent sales tax, not for public transportation, we want it for economic development, which means big giveaways to get Amazon warehouses here and these kinds of things. So the larger game we are understanding is that they want to wean the community off public transportation, and then get that sales tax money into what they call economic development, which is big corporate giveaways. So there's a larger, I don't know if that's the case everywhere where this is happening. Some places it might just be ideological. We want to privatize. Money is better. It's better done by the private sector. These kinds of things.
Yeah.
that's certainly here one of the larger context for this. We understand is this desire to put this money into corporate welfare.
Yeah. A couple of people in the chat mentioned that it looks like Milwaukee County has a new microtransit pilot that is going to be provided by VIA. And again, you're not opposed to microtransit. It's just if it's a private company, the money goes out of the community, and often the drivers are not protected by a union, right?
Right. It's predatory because it downgrades our standard of living, and it takes the wealth that should be in our communities and sends it into the pockets of the investors and owners in the private corporation. Not to mention the fact that, frankly, I just think VIA doesn't work. I think it's crummy. I think it's crummy software. I mean, from what we've seen here, it's really a disaster. I think they don't know what they're doing. I think it's kind of a scam that they're pulling. They go to things like the APTA, which is this, we've been told that the American Public Transportation Association. Yeah. And they evidently are there, wooing people, and it's a bit of a, yeah. So that for us, and the pilot, when you say a pilot, oftentimes these pilots are there because they've got federal funding, right? So I'd be interested in looking into these too. It's been since 2016 under the Obama administration is when a lot of the programs that are now predatory microtransit programs got their start with federal funding. So what we want to try to do at the federal level is say, look, at least as long as the Biden administration is in place, these programs, this funding it contradicts what y'all are saying about your priorities for good union jobs, for infrastructure spending, and for civil rights. So I think. Yeah, thank you for that note, for that example for Milwaukee.
Well, that's something, maybe we can end here, but that's something that we can definitely keep an eye on. And I know there are a couple of other communities in Wisconsin that have some form of microtransit. So again, we're hoping to meet up with Joshua and Kristine. Thanks, Kristine, for coming too. I appreciate that. In April. So we will be sending that information out in our follow-up email with a date and how to join us. And we really appreciate your telling your story and giving us a heads up about things to watch out for, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Watch out. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. And organize with us. We would be willing to share all the stuff we've got. We're marketing, any of our graphics, anything like that. We just want to try to get people prepared to fight back.
Great. Well, again, thanks so much for joining us. Oh no, I can't get my screen to move to the next thing, but I'll stop the share. I did want to again let people know that we will be sending follow-up information in an email for those interested in learning more about the Coalition Against Predatory Microtransit. As I said, we're going to try and have an informal online kind of story time and learning, sharing time. So we will send that out. And I think that we're done. This is our website one more time, witransitriders.org. We encourage you to visit there. We have a meeting once every month, at least once a month, where we share what's going on in our communities. It helps us keep track of trends. Also, if something's happening in one community that someone else has dealt with elsewhere, it helps us share ideas for how to deal with it or lobby for something better. And all of us together can have a bigger voice at the regional and state level as well. And if we can get something going with No Bus Cuts Denton to help educate our communities when these microtransit ideas are put forward, I think that would be a big benefit. So without further ado, I think we're going to take a break here and come back at noon for our WTRA annual business meeting. Anyone's welcome to stay or join us, but it won't be as interesting. So thanks again to our guests, Kristine, Joshua, and Ethan. And we really appreciate your taking time